Have you ever been alone in your room, completely absorbed in what you're doing, when suddenly you hear someone calling your name? You stop everything, look around, but there's absolutely no one there. Your heart might skip a beat, confusion sets in, and you start questioning your own sanity. Well, what if this mysterious experience isn't just your imagination playing tricks on you? What if there's something far more profound happening that connects you to dimensions beyond our physical reality? According to renowned psychiatrist and regression therapist Dr. Brian Weiss, when you hear your name being called and no one is physically present, you're experiencing one of the most significant spiritual phenomena that exists. This isn't a random occurrence, nor is it a sign of mental instability. Instead, it represents a direct communication attempt from your spiritual guides, deceased loved ones, or your own higher consciousness trying to capture your attention for something vitally important. Throughout this exploration, we're going to uncover the hidden meanings behind these mysterious calls, understand why certain people are more receptive to them than others, and discover how you can interpret these spiritual messages that are specifically meant for you. Dr. Weiss has spent decades studying consciousness, past lives, and spiritual communication, and his insights will completely transform how you perceive these unexplained moments. If you feel a deep resonance with these spiritual experiences, subscribe and activate notifications. Leave a comment saying, "I'm ready to evolve spiritually," and become part of our awakening community. The phenomenon of hearing your name when no one is there has been documented across cultures, religions, and historical periods for thousands of years. Ancient spiritual traditions from Egypt to Tibet have recognized this as a form of divine communication. The Tibetan Book of the Dead specifically mentions auditory spiritual experiences as ways the soul receives guidance during its earthly journey. Native American shamanic traditions describe similar occurrences as messages from ancestors who continue to watch over and guide the living. Dr. Brian Weiss, through his extensive work with past life regression and spiritual healing, has encountered countless patients who report these auditory experiences. His research indicates that these aren't random spiritual events, but rather carefully orchestrated attempts at communication from what he calls our spiritual support system. This system includes our spirit guides, guardian angels, deceased family members, and even our own higher self, attempting to break through the dense vibrations of physical reality. From a scientific perspective, Dr. Weiss explains that consciousness exists on multiple frequency levels. Our everyday awareness operates on a relatively dense, slow vibration that keeps us anchored to physical reality. However, spiritual beings and higher consciousness operate on much finer, faster frequencies. When they attempt to communicate with us, they must lower their vibration significantly, while we need to raise ours slightly to create a meeting point where communication becomes possible. The auditory system, particularly our ability to hear our own name, serves as one of the most direct pathways for this interdimensional communication. Your name carries a unique energetic signature that has been building throughout your entire lifetime. Every time someone speaks your name with love, concern, or intention, they're adding to this energetic imprint. This makes your name one of the strongest vibrational anchors that spiritual beings can use to get your attention. One of the biggest challenges people face when experiencing these spiritual communications is doubt. Society has conditioned us to dismiss anything that doesn't fit into conventional understanding as imagination or mental instability. Dr. Weiss emphasizes that this skeptical programming actually blocks us from receiving the spiritual guidance that's constantly available to us. When we immediately rationalize away these experiences, we're essentially hanging up on the spiritual realm's attempts to help us. Another significant challenge is timing. Spiritual communications often come when we least expect them, and our busy minds are typically too occupied with daily concerns to properly receive these messages. The spiritual realm operates outside of linear time, so their communications might seem random from our perspective, but they're actually perfectly timed according to our soul's needs and spiritual development. Fear represents perhaps the greatest obstacle to spiritual communication. Many people become frightened when they hear unexplained voices, even when it's just their name being called. This fear immediately raises our energetic defenses and shuts down our receptivity to spiritual contact. Dr. Weiss teaches that recognizing these experiences as loving communications rather than threatening intrusions completely changes our ability to receive and benefit from them. Share in the comments a personal experience where you felt the presence of spiritual mentors or experienced an inner transformation that seemed to come from beyond yourself. The process of spiritual communication through auditory experiences typically follows specific patterns that Dr. Weiss has identified through years of research. Initially, most people experience what he calls attention-getting communications. These are simple calls of your name designed to make you aware that spiritual contact is being attempted. The beings trying to communicate understand that our conscious minds need time to adjust to these experiences, so they start with the most familiar sound possible, your own name. As your receptivity increases and your fear decreases, these communications can become more complex. Some people begin hearing short phrases, words of encouragement, or even brief conversations. Dr. Weiss explains that this progression happens because spiritual beings are essentially training us to become better receivers of their communications. They're gradually expanding our capacity to handle more detailed spiritual information. The transformation that occurs when someone begins consciously receiving spiritual communications is profound. Dr. Weiss has observed that people who learn to recognize and welcome these experiences report feeling less alone, more guided in their life decisions, and significantly more connected to their spiritual purpose. They begin to understand that death is not an ending but a transition, and that love and support from the spiritual realm never cease. This spiritual awakening often triggers what Dr. Weiss calls accelerated soul growth. When people realize they're not isolated beings struggling alone through life, but rather supported souls on a guided journey, their entire perspective shifts. They become more intuitive, more compassionate, and more aligned with their authentic spiritual purpose. The personal impact of acknowledging these spiritual communications extends far beyond the immediate experience. Dr. Weiss has found that people who embrace these connections report significant improvements in their emotional well-being, relationships, and overall life satisfaction. They develop what he describes as spiritual confidence, a deep knowing that they're being guided and supported even during life's most challenging moments. Understanding that deceased loved ones continue to communicate with us through these auditory experiences can be particularly healing for those dealing with grief. Dr. Weiss explains that death doesn't sever the bonds of love, it simply changes the form of communication. When someone hears a deceased parent, spouse, or friend calling their name, it's often that person's way of saying, "I'm still here, I still love you, and I'm still part of your journey." These experiences also serve as powerful reminders to slow down and pay attention to our inner guidance. In our fast-paced world, we often override our intuitive insights and spiritual promptings. When spiritual beings call our name, they're essentially saying, "Stop what you're doing and listen. There's something important you need to know or consider right now." If this message resonates with your soul, leave a like so more awakening consciousness can discover this spiritual truth. Dr. Weiss has documented numerous signs that indicate authentic spiritual communication versus other possible explanations for hearing voices. Genuine spiritual communications typically occur during quiet moments when you're relaxed but alert. They often happen during transitional times of day, early morning, twilight, or late evening, when the veil between dimensions is naturally thinner. The quality of the voice is another important indicator. Spiritual communications usually sound clear but somehow different from physical voices. They might seem to come from inside your head rather than through your ears, or they might have an unusual clarity that cuts through other ambient sounds. The emotional feeling accompanying the experience is crucial. Authentic spiritual communications carry feelings of love, peace, or gentle urgency, never fear or malevolence. Physical evidence often accompanies these spiritual contacts. Dr. Weiss reports that people frequently experience sudden temperature changes, unexplained electrical disturbances, or the movement of objects shortly before or after hearing their name called. These physical manifestations occur because spiritual beings must manipulate energy to communicate across dimensional boundaries, and this energy manipulation can affect the physical environment. The timing of these communications provides another layer of evidence for their spiritual origin. Dr. Weiss has found that people often hear their name called just before receiving important news, making significant decisions, or during moments when they need comfort or guidance. This precise timing suggests an intelligence and caring intention behind the communications that goes far beyond random auditory hallucinations. Research into electronic voice phenomena and instrumental transcommunication has provided additional validation for Dr. Weiss's theories about spiritual communication. These fields study how spiritual beings can manipulate electronic devices to communicate with the living, and the patterns observed align closely with the auditory experiences people report when hearing their names called. The ability to receive spiritual communications appears to be enhanced by certain lifestyle practices and mental states that Dr. Weiss recommends. Meditation, even just a few minutes daily, significantly increases spiritual receptivity by calming the mental chatter that typically drowns out subtle spiritual signals. Regular meditation essentially trains your consciousness to distinguish between your own thoughts and communications from spiritual sources. Spending time in nature also enhances spiritual communication abilities. Natural environments carry higher vibrational frequencies and fewer electromagnetic interference patterns than urban areas. Dr. Weiss suggests that people who regularly experience auditory spiritual communications often report them happening more frequently when they're outdoors or in quiet, natural settings. Maintaining a spiritual practice, whether through prayer, contemplation, or energy work, creates what Dr. Weiss calls spiritual momentum. This momentum keeps your energetic channels open and your consciousness attuned to higher frequency communications. People who regularly engage in spiritual practices become like well-tuned radio receivers, able to pick up spiritual transmissions more clearly and consistently. Emotional state plays a crucial role in spiritual receptivity. Dr. Weiss has observed that people are most likely to receive spiritual communications when they're in states of calm openness, gratitude, or even appropriate sadness that comes from missing deceased loved ones. These emotional states create energetic conditions that facilitate spiritual contact. Comment below, "Today I release old patterns and embrace the light of spiritual renewal." Dr. Weiss teaches specific techniques for enhancing your ability to receive and interpret spiritual communications. The first step involves developing what he calls spiritual discernment, the ability to distinguish between genuine spiritual contact and your own mental projections or wishful thinking. This discernment comes through practice and honest self-reflection about your experiences. Creating dedicated quiet times specifically for spiritual communication can dramatically increase your receptivity. Dr. Weiss recommends setting aside at least 10 minutes daily for what he calls spiritual listening. During this time, you sit quietly, set the intention to be open to spiritual guidance, and simply listen with your inner awareness rather than trying to force any particular experience. Learning to interpret the messages behind hearing your name requires understanding that spiritual communications often work through symbolism and feeling rather than literal words. When you hear your name called, Dr. Weiss suggests immediately checking in with your intuition about what the spiritual realm might be trying to tell you. The guidance might be about a decision you need to make, a person you should contact, or simply a reminder that you're loved and supported. Keeping a spiritual communication journal helps develop pattern recognition and strengthens your connection to spiritual guidance. Dr. Weiss advises writing down every instance of hearing your name called, along with what was happening in your life at the time, what you were thinking about, and any insights or feelings that came with the experience. Responding to spiritual communications with gratitude and acknowledgement strengthens the communication channel. Dr. Weiss suggests that when you hear your name called, you mentally or verbally acknowledge the contact by saying something like, "Thank you for reaching out to me. I'm listening and open to your guidance." This response lets spiritual beings know their communication was received and welcomed. The practice of automatic writing can also enhance your ability to receive more detailed spiritual communications. After hearing your name called, Dr. Weiss recommends sitting with pen and paper and writing whatever thoughts or impressions come to mind without censoring or analyzing them. Often, this process reveals the specific message that spiritual beings were trying to convey. Express gratitude to the higher plan by leaving your like as a sign of connection and appreciation for this received message. Throughout his decades of research, Dr. Weiss has collected countless testimonials from people whose lives were transformed by learning to recognize and respond to spiritual communications. One woman reported that after years of dismissing the voice calling her name, she finally acknowledged it during a particularly difficult period in her life. The experience led to a profound sense of being supported and guided that helped her through a major life transition with confidence and peace. A man shared how hearing his deceased father calling his name eventually led to a series of spiritual experiences that completely changed his understanding of life and death. He learned to communicate with his father regularly and received guidance that helped him make important business decisions and navigate family relationships with greater wisdom and compassion. Dr. Weiss himself has experienced these communications throughout his life, and they played a significant role in his transition from traditional psychiatry to past life regression therapy. He credits spiritual guidance received through auditory communications for helping him overcome his initial skepticism about reincarnation and past life healing. These testimonials consistently report similar themes: reduced fear of death, increased sense of purpose, stronger intuitive abilities, and a profound feeling of being loved and supported by unseen helpers. People discover that they're not alone in their struggles and that spiritual guidance is constantly available to those who learn to recognize and receive it. The healing that occurs when people accept spiritual communications often extends to their relationships with others. Understanding that love transcends physical death helps people release grief more easily and maintain loving connections with deceased family members and friends. This understanding also enhances their appreciation for the living people in their lives. Many people report that acknowledging spiritual communications has improved their decision-making abilities. They learn to consult their spiritual guidance when facing important choices and find that their lives flow more smoothly when they follow spiritual promptings rather than relying solely on logical analysis. The scientific community's growing acceptance of consciousness research has begun to provide theoretical frameworks for understanding spiritual communications. Dr. Weiss points to quantum physics concepts like non-locality and consciousness field theory as potential explanations for how spiritual beings can communicate across dimensional boundaries. Research into near-death experiences has also validated many of Dr. Weiss's findings about spiritual communication. People who have had near-death experiences often report being able to communicate with deceased relatives and spiritual beings through direct thought transmission, which aligns with the auditory experiences reported by people who hear their names called. Studies of mediumship and psychic phenomena have documented similar patterns of spiritual communication that support Dr. Weiss's theories. The consistency of reports across different cultures, age groups, and belief systems suggests that these experiences represent genuine spiritual contact rather than psychological phenomena. Brain imaging studies of people during meditation and spiritual experiences show measurable changes in neural activity that correlate with reports of spiritual communications. These findings suggest that spiritual experiences involve real neurological processes rather than imaginary or delusional states. Comment. I align myself with purposes of good and continue firmly on my journey of elevation. The integration of spiritual communications into daily life requires what Dr. Weiss calls practical spirituality. This means learning to balance spiritual openness with grounded, practical living. People who successfully integrate these experiences report that spiritual guidance enhances rather than replaces their rational decision-making processes. Developing trust in spiritual guidance is a gradual process that requires patience and discernment. Dr. Weiss advises starting with small decisions and observing the outcomes when you follow spiritual promptings versus when you ignore them. Over time, this practice builds confidence in your ability to receive and interpret spiritual guidance accurately. Creating a supportive community of like-minded individuals helps sustain your spiritual development. Dr. Weiss emphasizes that sharing these experiences with understanding friends or spiritual groups provides validation and encouragement that helps overcome societal skepticism about spiritual communications. Learning to distinguish between ego-based desires and authentic spiritual guidance is crucial for developing reliable spiritual communication skills. Dr. Weiss teaches that genuine spiritual guidance typically feels peaceful, loving, and aligned with your highest good and the good of others, while ego-based thoughts often carry anxiety, selfishness, or fear. The practice of spiritual communication requires ongoing commitment to personal growth and healing. Dr. Weiss has found that unresolved emotional issues, traumatic memories, and negative thought patterns can interfere with clear spiritual reception. Working through these blocks through therapy, meditation, or energy healing enhances your ability to receive spiritual guidance. Maintaining balance between spiritual focus and worldly responsibilities is essential for sustainable spiritual development. Dr. Weiss warns against becoming so focused on spiritual communications that you neglect practical matters or become disconnected from ordinary human relationships and responsibilities. Understanding that spiritual communications